There we go. Wait a couple minutes. I see a couple people walking in. All right. Well, good evening and welcome, everyone. We're so glad to see you here. I'm Lisa. Whoa, it's a little loud. Little feedback? Did you get feedback? Okay, just me. I'm Lisa German. I'm the University Librarian and Dean of the Libraries here at the University of Minnesota. And tonight we have the privilege of honoring and hearing from two extraordinary individuals, Laurie Hertzel and Lauren Stringer, this year's recipients of our Kerlan Award. Laurie Hertzel is the former editor of the Star Tribune Book Review, past president of the National Book Critics Circle, and author of News to Me, Adventures of an Accidental Journalist. In a few minutes, Chris Kiesling, our Director of Archives and Special Collections, will introduce Laurie. Lauren Stringer is the author and illustrator of 4 celebrated picture books. Winter is the Warmest Season, When Stravinsky Met Nijinsky, Yellow Time, and The Dark Was Done. She has also illustrated many award-winning picture books and is a painter, a set designer, and a public speaker. Alejandro Haynes, chair of the Kerlan Award Committee, will introduce Lauren later in the program. Since 1975, the Kerlan Award has been given annually to an author or illustrator in recognition of their exceptional attainments in the creation of children's literature, support of the creators of children's literature, and/or generous contributions and support of the University of Minnesota's Library's Kerlan collection of children's literature. Today, Laurie and Lauren will join an impressive roster of Kerlan Award recipients, including such literary luminaries as Wanda Gag, Kate DiCamillo, Lois Lowry, Barbara Cooney, John Coy, Andrea Davis Pinkney, and John Shefska. Their materials and those of many other esteemed children's literature creators are contained in our Kerlan collection, which is housed in the caverns below this building. The Kerlan is open and available to everyone: researchers, educators, students, budding authors, illustrators, and to anyone who simply loves children's literature. Now at this time, I'd like to acknowledge the people upon whose land we meet. The University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. It is important to acknowledge the peoples on whose land we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with tribal nations. We also acknowledge that words are not enough. We must ensure that our institution provides support, resources, programs that increase access to all aspects of higher education for American Indian students, staff, faculty, and community members. Now please welcome Chris Kiesling, who will introduce Laurie Hertzel.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome everyone. It's great to see you all here, members of the Kerlan Friends and the Kerlan Board, and writers and illustrators and just friends of children's literature. So thank you for coming. It's my privilege to introduce Laurie Hertzel. In 4 decades of journalism, Laurie has worked as a columnist, news reporter, feature writer, news editor, editor of special projects, team leader, magazine writer and editor, and, for 15 years, the books editor at the Star Tribune. During her tenure at the Star Tribune, at a time when book review pages were shrinking and children's materials were given short shrift, Hertzel has been a continuous supporter for the promotion of children's and young adult literature, free reading, and libraries, as well as the work of the Kerlan Children's Literature Collections. Hertzel's editorial columns engaged a community of readers, often challenged dated assumptions about genre, diversity, and contemporary issues like censorship. Now, Hertzel reviews books for the Star Tribune, Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post. As Lisa mentioned, Hertzel has served on the board of and was past president of the National Book Critics Circle. Sun Young Shin, poet, writer, and cultural worker, wrote on the occasion of Laurie's retirement that she had been a pillar of the literary, book, and journalistic culture here, and has been a source of illumination, humor, intelligence, vision, discernment, and joy. She had excelled at building common ground among readers, writers, and those invested in our democracy. So, Laurie, it's my privilege to give you the Kerlan Award, which you richly deserved for all of your support of the Kerlan collection over these years. Richly deserved.
Thank you. I'm not going to cry. I'm overwhelmed by this, but I have to look at it. It has my name on it. You can't take it back. Thank you so much. Children's books have always been an important part of my life. They made a reader out of me, starting not with the Dick and Jane books, which even as a child I thought were silly, but with fairy tales and picture books like Paddle to the Sea, and with a wonderful anthology of stories and poems called Beloved Tales that my parents gave me for Christmas. I still have that book, though the cover is long gone, and the first few pages are scribbled on with crayon by me. I was always a big believer in claiming books as my own and wrote my name in them in big letters. I was lucky to grow up in a house full of books and to get books as presents for birthdays and Christmas. I learned to read by sounding out the words out loud. It took a while to figure out how to sound out the words silently, and until I did, I was quite annoying to some of my many siblings. One year, my parents gave me Little Town on the Prairie for my birthday, not realizing, I guess, that it was not the first in the series. One of my father's professor friends came by the house and saw me reading it. He crouched down to eye level, which is always a great way to talk to children, and he asked me what I thought of the book. Nobody had ever asked me that question before. But Ace Levang's wife was a librarian, and Ace was good with kids. I had only read the opening chapter, which was just a few paragraphs long, and so I said, "Well, the chapters are short." He laughed, though I had been trying to be funny, and I guess that was my very first book review. I did get better. When I was in high school, I had a job working in the children's room of the Duluth Public Library. This was in the early 1970s, the time when Maurice Sendak's picture book, In the Night Kitchen, first came out. And there was, across the country, as well as in Duluth, predictable outrage from a few people about a picture book for children that had illustrations that depicted full frontal male nudity. Full frontal male nudity of a baby, that is. I now know that some librarians elsewhere in the country painted little diapers on the book's character, Mickey. Some actually took X-Acto knives and cut out the offensive parts of the body. This was a way, they claimed, to keep the book on the shelves. The wonderful librarians that I worked for, Virginia Havernan and Eleanor McCorson, did not do this. They thought Sendak's book was delightful, and it was, magical and weird and dreamlike. This was also right around the time when Judy Blume's novel for young teens, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, was being challenged. I guess because it dealt with real things that real teen girls worry about: the size of their breasts, their periods, boys, and confusion about religion. Again, some people, I'm not sure who or how many, complained about this book. There's an odd belief among some adults that children wouldn't think about these things if they didn't read about them in books, which is, of course, nonsense. When you're a teen girl, this is pretty much all you think about. And to find a book that reflects that is such a relief, so affirming and helpful. And yet some adults thought the book was going to taint the innocence of their daughters, and so they tried to have it banned. For a while, Mrs. Havernan and Mrs. McCorson put the Judy Blume book behind the library desk and only circulated it to people who asked for it. And then after a while, the hoopla died down and the book went back on the shelves where it belonged. I was very lucky to work in this library when I was growing up, and I was very lucky to work with two such level-headed, non-judgmental, humorous, and generous librarians as Mrs. Havernan and Mrs. McCorson. At the time I was, as I said, in high school, where I was reading Arthur Miller and William Shakespeare and George Eliot and Geoffrey Chaucer for class. But the librarians knew where my heart was, and they pulled books off the shelves in the YA room for me. And every night I smuggled home a big tote bag full of children's books and devoured them after my homework was done. I was sort of embarrassed at first to be reading books for children, but Mrs. Havernan and Mrs. McCorson were so enthusiastic about these books that they won me over. They read them too. They were the ones who told me about Jean George's My Side of the Mountain. They told me about Gary Paulson. They told me about the late published Final Little House book, The First 4 Years, which I'd not known about. They told me to read The Witch of Blackbird Pond, which is not actually about a witch, but is about a misunderstood woman who goes against the mores and traditions of 17th century New England. Their open-mindedness helped open my mind. Every child should have opportunities like these. It was in children's books like Harriet the Spy and Anne of Green Gables where I saw myself, or more accurately, I saw a better version of myself. I saw feisty girls who pursued their dreams, refused to give in, fought back. Most of them wanted to be writers, and they wrote. This was not me back then. I was a pretty milquetoast little girl myself, shy and passive. But these books gave me hope and showed me how a smallish, bespectacled person such as myself could achieve things. Do you remember the last scene in Harriet the Spy when she lugs the typewriter upstairs and starts typing furiously? And she says something like, "Wait till the New Yorker gets a load of this." And that line delighted me so much. And it wasn't long before I sent my own short story to the New Yorker, and they sent it back. Every child should have the opportunity to read books in which they see themselves, or see better versions of themselves, or find hope, or inspiration, or understanding. Every child. This is one of many, many reasons why banning books is wrong, and why we need more diverse books for children. I was lucky to grow up in a family that valued books. My parents never tried to control what I read, and they never took a book away from me. Not even when I tried to read Myra Breckinridge, which I knew was dirty but did not know why. And I was lucky to work with librarians like Mrs. Havernan and Mrs. McCorson. But children shouldn't have to rely on luck and fortune to find books that reflect their lives, inspire them, give them hope, show them characters who are like themselves. Every child should have access to such books. In this ridiculous and dangerous time, children's books are being banned at a rate unseen in decades, and in a much more concerted way than back in the 1970s. For a variety of reasons, there are a lot of people out there who are trying to stop children from reading. Not just stopping their own children, but stopping all children. Some states, Texas, Iowa, have passed laws that hold librarians and teachers responsible if books they don't particularly like are found in school libraries. Overwhelmingly, the books that are banned are books that are about GLBT children or about people of color. Overwhelmingly, these bans are of new books, because for so long, books that reflected the lives of children of color or gay or trans children were few and far between. And so the more these books enter the mainstream, the more certain adults are fighting against them. They are also banning books for very young children, books that they fear or pretend they fear indoctrinate children. Books like And Tango Makes Three, the true story of two male penguins in the Central Park Zoo in New York City who took in a baby penguin and helped rear it together. This book was banned in Florida and Texas because it apparently violates the Don't Say Gay law, although frankly, I don't think penguins say gay. At least not in English. These self-appointed censors are banning Separate is Never Equal, the nonfiction picture book by Duncan Tonatiuh, which tells the story of Sylvia Mendez, whose family tried to integrate California schools. Little Sylvia was turned away from her school and told to join the Mexican school instead. This book has been banned in Pennsylvania and Texas because it apparently made a white child feel uncomfortable. I think we should just sit and think about that for a while. There are other ways to ban books, or at least to quash the sentiment behind the book. Love in the Library is a beautiful picture book by Maggie Tokuda Hall that I reviewed for the Star Tribune a few years back. It's based on the romance of the author's grandparents who fell in love in the library at Minidoka, the internment camp in Idaho, where the United States incarcerated Japanese Americans during World War II. As with a lot of nonfiction picture books these days, including science books and nature books, there's material at the back that provides context and references. The book was not banned, exactly, but Scholastic Books wanted to reprint it and place it in classrooms all over the country. This is a very attractive offer for an author. But they wanted to be allowed to edit it, removing the word racist and removing some of the context in the back of the book. This is worse, but similar to putting a diaper on Mickey in Sendak's book. It's what Sendak's publisher Ursula Nordstrom called an act of censorship by mutilation rather than by obvious suppression. Tokuda Hall said, absolutely not. If you haven't, I think you should buy all of these books. They are moving and lovely. So why is book banning happening now? Because books are powerful. Because books are democratic. Because there's no better way to understand yourself and others, most importantly, to understand others, than through stories. Think about how much books meant to me as a child. And then think how there are forces out there trying their hardest to prevent other children from finding that same inspiration, that same hope, that same feeling that they are understood somewhere by someone, that they are not alone. This isn't the talk I thought I would give when Lisa von Drasik first told me about the Kerlan Award. I thought I would talk about how important books were to me as a child, opening up my world and giving me refuge from a big chaotic family and setting me on a path to becoming a lifelong reader. But I couldn't think about how important books were to me without thinking about how books should be important to all children. And from there, it was an easy jump to think about how so many children are being actively denied this crucial part of growing up. There are organizations out there that are fighting this. PEN America just opened a branch office in Florida to fight the book banning there. The office is funded, in part, by a cadre of authors, including Judy Blume. The National Coalition Against Censorship is doing good work, as is the organization We Need Diverse Books. There are organizations that are dedicating to giving books to children instead of taking them away, such as Literacy Minnesota and Reach Out and Read, which gives books to children when they are visiting the doctor's office. I hope you support these organizations if you can. I hope you support your local bookstores that carry these books and your local libraries which lend these books. And above all, I hope you support librarians who are fighting the good fight, a harder fight and a more important fight than ever. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Alex Hennis, and I'm the chairman of the award committee. Tonight we're recognizing Lauren Stringer for her work in writing and illustrating children's books and her support of the Kerlan. Having come to us by way of Great Falls, Montana, where she was born, and subsequently living in various places in the United States, including California, Pennsylvania, and New York, it's fortunate for us that life led Lauren here to become a long-time resident of Minneapolis with her husband and her beloved cats. She attended the University of California, Santa Cruz, earning a BA in art and art history. Her stellar career that followed included winning many awards and accolades, which I think they've been mentioned already. Her recent book, The Dark Was Done, was published by an imprint of Simon & Schuster and was a finalist for the Minnesota Book Awards. And for the past 30 years, Lauren has supported the work of the Kerlan Collection through her generous donations of manuscripts, color studies, original art, and process work. So she's going to join that pantheon of authors that have been honored before, like Wanda Gog, Kate DiCamillo, Tommy DePaola, and many others who are exceptional and who are exceptionally accomplished and were very generous with their contributions to the library. And where do we have Lauren? Oh, there we go.
Just gonna get set up here for a second. Already? All right, I'm gonna take it away for a minute. Hello, thank you, Alex. I'm Lauren Stringer, and several of you in the audience know that I am just recovering from pneumonia. Thus, the husky voice and persistent cough. But two things you need to know about me and pneumonia. One is I'm no longer contagious. Two is I've had it several times before, and it's not always a bad thing. For instance, in 2014, when I had pneumonia, I was bedridden, and I pulled out some old poems, and I found one called Yellow Time that I had written the first year that we moved here. And I thought, maybe this could be a picture book. And I played with it for a little while, and I napped. And I reworked it, and I napped. And then I reworked it all in that same afternoon, and I said, I think it's ready. And I sent it to my editor, Ellen Johnston, and 7 minutes later, she wrote back and said, let's publish it. So there we go with the manuscript, and it turned into the book Yellow Time. I will tell you that this time I wrote the speech during pneumonia, so I hope it turns out as well. When Lisa von Drasek first called me about receiving this award, I was shocked. Then I wondered, isn't this an award that one receives at the end of one's career? Aren't I still at the beginning of mine? When I first began working on this slideshow, I thought for sure I would tell you that the only reason I am here as an author and illustrator of picture books is because years ago, the author Deborah Fraser came to see a show of painted boxes that opened and closed. And she said, you should be making picture books. She took photos of my boxes and some furniture I had painted to her editor, who had the great courage to send me a manuscript to illustrate, even though I had never dreamt of being a picture book illustrator. I thought for sure I would tell you about my first writing group, the Inkslingers, and how after the very first meeting I was so excited I went home and wrote a story, my very first picture book. And I was so excited that I thought, I think it's done. And I sent it to my editor, and she called back and she said, let's publish this. It doesn't always happen this easily, but it did here. And I was so excited that at our second meeting, we celebrated with champagne. And the book was Winter is the Warmest Season. When I was putting together this show, I thought for sure I would tell you about raising my family while illustrating picture books and how my children became the characters in my books. I thought I would tell you about how writing scripts and painting sets for Circus Juventus made me a better writer, and about how watching my son and his fellow performers inspired me to paint a riot. I thought I should probably tell him about how my husband's composing of symphonies inspired me to paint an orchestra. And then I didn't want to miss telling you that my daughter, who lived in Morocco, met her true love there, and going to visit her and going to her wedding inspired the book I am currently working on. And then I thought, of course, I should tell you about how my books marked huge emotional shifts in my life. It's no wonder that the first sketches for Scarecrow were skull-like after the death of my father. And after my mother died, and Cynthia Rylant wrote a letter of condolence to me, along with a manuscript for Snow, saying that she knew when she wrote that this story was meant for me to illustrate, my mother ended up showing up in the book, not only as the grandma character, but when I started going through her photos of her as a child, she ended up being both the grandma and the little girl in the book. But instead, I decided to focus on process, because that is what the Kerlan collection holds, treasure boxes full of authors and illustrators' process. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to be the exhibit preparer for the ABC of it, a show of the Kerlan's treasures. I got to have an intimate relationship with the materials to be displayed, building the right support for the spines of the books, and choosing the best way of mounting the art for the visitors to see the show. This intimacy with the materials, sensing what kind of support is necessary, and all the while creating something behind the scenes, invisible to the viewer, is akin to being an author and illustrator of children's books. So much happens behind the scenes. And this is what you are finding in the treasure chest of the Kerlan, the behind the scenes of literature for children. I know the Kerlan collection very well, and am grateful to be a part of it. For me, the most joyful part of creating a book is the beginning and the end. The middle is always like a roller coaster, with the highs of successful days in the studio and the lows of failure. But the beginning is always filled with the excitement of starting a new manuscript, and the end is filled with the pride of the completion of the illustrations and the anticipation of sharing them with the world. I have had the privilege of working with the same editor for nearly all of my books. An incredible relationship of mutual wonder and respect has evolved over nearly 30 years of making books together. My editor, Alan Johnston, has an intuitive sense of timing, always sending stories that challenge me, provoke my imagination, and at the same time somehow uncannily connect with whatever is happening in my life at the moment. When first considering a manuscript, I look for openings. I have turned down stories that are filled with too much description. The author has already painted the pictures with words, and I would be painting something akin to color by number. I have chosen to paint stories with main characters like mud, rain puddles, scarecrows, leaves, snow, and origami animals. This allows me to create a story within a story, additional characters and scenes that both lead the reader beyond and between the text, and allows me to explore childhood memories and present-day experiences. I have also illustrated stories with true-to-life main characters like our ancestors in Our Family Tree by Lisa Westberg Peters, or Frank Lloyd Wright in The Shape of the World by K.L. Going. And I have written stories with real-life characters like Igor Stravinsky and Vaslav Nijinsky from When Stravinsky Met Nijinsky, and Henry Matisse in An Abundance of Light, which is forthcoming. The books with real characters require loads of research, and I love research. And of course, I have illustrated books with imagined characters like the dark, a girl who dances with deer, a boy and his stuffed animals, or a bear who loses his smile. And for these, I have to use my imagination and do loads of sketches to find my characters. Once I have a story to illustrate, I always write the story very big and hang it on my studio wall. Those small words on those few pages can easily go astray in a messy, busy studio. The act of writing the story large and putting it on my wall is a ritual. It is my first commitment to making the story into pictures. Each new story I illustrate, I choose a new journal, because who doesn't love a new journal? And every book has its own journal, and inside the journal, it becomes a place for all my thoughts, my research, colors, and ideas. The author Thomas Merton wrote, "The imagination needs time to browse." I echo this philosophy when starting the illustrations for a new manuscript. I call it my hunting and gathering phase. I visit museums and libraries, cull through art books, magazines, and postcards. I love this part of making a picture book. There's no censorship or pressure allowed. During this time, I may learn the structure of a snowflake, so that when I paint a book about snow, I can paint each unique snowflake. No two are alike. Or during this time, I might build a timeline that reflects 4.5 billion years of Earth's history before even making a sketch, as I did when painting our family tree. Or I may teach myself to fold a square sheet of paper into 48 different origami animals, even realizing that there are more than one way to fold an animal, so I have to fold it 2 or 3 times until I find the one I want for the book. Once my hunting and gathering phase is complete, I begin drawing and painting hundreds of sketches, getting to know my characters and scenes in color and in black and white. I create many storyboards for all my books, trying to get the flow of the book and know where the text will go on the page. And for each book, I make small book dummies, numerous ones, to create the drama of the turning page, matching the pace and rhythm of the story to the page turns. While finding the flow of the book and the characters and scenery, doubt can sometimes become so strong that I even consider quitting altogether. The only person privy to my process at this point is my husband, Matthew. This is when I'm most grateful for the separation between author and illustrator. I need that space for my imagination to respond to the story without feeling beholden to anyone. Once I have shared my book dummy with my editor, then I begin the originals, filled with anticipation. All of the painted sketches and ideas transform gradually into the illustrations. Painting pictures still holds the same magic for me as it did when I was a child. I delight in the characters and scenes that come to life with a stroke of my brush. But it doesn't always come easily. There are some illustrations that just don't work with the rest of the illustrations. And this time, I worked in acrylics when I painted Scarecrow. So that last illustration just wasn't working with the rest. Working in acrylics, I could start to paint over it. And so the bird didn't work. I started painting out part of the bird. I painted it completely out, painted it back in. Still wasn't working. It was the clouds, so I painted out the clouds and painted them back in all the way across. I added in the sun, but suddenly it was too heavy on the left side, so I painted out the sun and painted it in again on the right. It was nearly there. It needed one more thing, a rainbow. There's about 10 layers of paint on that painting. More recently, I switched when I was working on When Stravinsky Met Nijinsky to lighter, just a one layer of paint. So when I painted this scene of the audience watching the ballet that caused a riot in Paris, it didn't work, and I had to start completely over. And I'm glad I did, because here's the final illustration. When I was working on Looking for Smile, this painting stood out. It just felt a little abstract. There was no, compared to the rest of the book. So I said, I've got to start over. It has a very thin layer of watercolor and gouache. So I added in a paw from the next painting. But that felt a little awkward and clumsy to me. So I added it again, but suddenly his head was too far from the bird, and this is a very poignant moment in the story. So I had to repaint it a 4th time, this time capturing exactly what I wanted, the emotion as the bird begins to sing and Bear suddenly says, "What is happening here?" Sometimes in the middle of a painting or of a book, I even finished the book dummy and sent it off to my editor. It still didn't feel right. When Wendy Orr wrote the book, it was originally called One Night. It was about a little girl and her cat who go camping, but she thinks she's a princess and her cat is a panther. So I had both the real life and the imagined life in the story, but it wasn't working so well. And suddenly I had an epiphany. I remembered my sister and me. My sister, who's older, was always the princess. I tried, you can see I'm on the left there, didn't work so well. I wanted to be a kitty cat. So, thinking that, I did a quick sketch of the older sister princess and the little sister kitty cat or panther and sent it off to my editor, who shared it with Wendy Orr, and we all agreed that it should be 2 sisters instead of one single girl and her cat. And it became the princess and her panther together. Sometimes changes are made at the very last minute. Right before I was finishing, The Dark was done, I had worked out all my main characters, the boy, the poet, the gardener, and the burglar. And during the making of this book, my editor fell in love with the burglar, partly because she had burglars, or what we now call burglars, visiting her every night, her raccoons. And she would send me photos and say, the burglars visited again. We had lots of conversations during the making of this book about her burglars, and just as I was about to pack up all the art and everything was finished, I looked at my burglar and I said, wait, my burglar needs a tail. When I finish a book, I put all the illustrations up on my studio wall so I can comb through and see what works and what doesn't. Sometimes, if the author I know lives in town, I will invite her to come and see all the artwork that's finished. That's a rare thing. I comb through, making sure all the eyes are right, the clothes are right, the colors are right, there's no extra spots of paint anywhere. It's also a time to kind of celebrate the whole flow of the book before it's turned into a book. And when it's completely completed, I pack it all up with glassine between the pages into a box. I'm usually very exhausted. And send it off to my publisher, who then turns it into a book. People have asked me if I prefer to illustrate my own stories. I can truthfully reply that every story that comes my way is a gift, whether it is my own or another's. I have found that illustrating others' stories transports me beyond my own world and into the newness and surprise of the authors. What a privilege it is to make children's books, and what a privilege it is to be an illustrator and author. I am grateful and eager for the journey that each new story brings. I would like to thank Alex Jennis and the Kerlan Award Committee for this incredible honor and award. I would like to congratulate my fellow awardee, Laurie Hertzel. It is a pleasure to share this year's Kerlan Award with you. I would like to thank Lisa Von Drasik, the curator of the Kerlan collection, and I would also like to thank Karin Nelson Hoyle, the former curator of the collection, for convincing me so long ago that my work deserved to be among the treasures of the Kerlan collection. And finally, I would like to thank my husband, Matthew, who has been the best partner in art and life. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Laurie, if you want to join us up here. We have some time for questions, and if you'll wait until Lauren or Lisa come to you with a microphone, we'll make sure this gets into the recording. So we have about 10, 15 minutes for questions.
Thank you.
Is this okay if I ask a question of the audience?
Sure, sure.
I made a little connection between your speech and Lauren's presence here. I don't know if you know that her book, Our Family Tree, appears on the American Library Association's list of banned and challenged books. Did you know that? Okay, that's my only question. This was way back, in 2003. And the issues at the time were not, gender was not at the forefront of the public discourse. Creationism was huge. And so then we had the gall to publish this book about evolution. And it just, everybody, all the educators became unnerved.
Yeah, I would often visit schools, and they would say, please talk about all your books, but do not talk about, that evolution book. Please don't talk about. So it was kind of that banning by omission.
So this one is for Lauren. So how did you start drawing? I mean, what was your inspiration to start drawing as a child? You said you read a lot, et cetera, but why did you feel that illustrating was the best way to go?
Well, actually, is this on? It's on. I loved pictures when I was a child. I just always drew. I always had a crayon in my hand, and mostly I drew cats and my family and dogs and houses, lots of, kind of things that were fun to draw. I loved picture books. I loved looking at the pictures more than reading. And I know I've told this story, but I'll tell it really quickly. I had my older sister, who was the princess. She started reading chapter books. In those days, it was Nancy Drew. And I just thought, oh my God, who would read books with no pictures? This is crazy, I just thought it was crazy. And so one Christmas, she asked for like 6 Nancy Drew books. And I hadn't heard of Nancy Drew. And I thought, oh, I can't wait. It's going to be filled with books filled with pictures that Nancy drew. So when Christmas came around, I was very disappointed. But I did eventually begin to read, of course, and I became a huge Nancy Drew fan and read many, many, many books. But I've always loved to draw. I always wanted to become an artist, and picture books kind of came to me accidentally, but in a wonderful way. Meant to be.
Well, I have a question. As I saw the picture or the slide where you had your finished product boxed up and you were sending it off to your publisher, my stomach is in knots. How do you get it there? It's so precious. How does it get transported?
FedEx. Overnight, early morning delivery. You pay the extra dollars. But yes, it's definitely, I send it off and it's an act of faith, and then I come home and just wait, wait. And the publisher's always very good about telling me it's arrived immediately. So far.
Laurie, you wrote your own book. Tell me about that process after writing for everybody else and and reviewing and all that kind of stuff. Tell me about writing your own.
Well, I had been a reporter in Duluth, and then I had been a magazine writer. And when I came to the Star Tribune, it was as an editor. And I realized after a few years that even though I thought of myself as a writer, I hadn't written anything in a long time. I had only been editing. And so I started writing a blog. And, this was quite a while ago. The blog had, about 100 people who looked at it. It was very small, but I loved it. I mean, I wrote it every day, and it kind of got me back into writing. And I did a week-long series for the blog on how I fell into journalism, and the 100 people who read it thought it was really interesting, so I wrote another week-long, and then I wrote another week-long. And at the time, I had been reading manuscripts for the University of Minnesota Press for Todd Oriola. And he and I were chatting one day, and I happened to mention that I had written these blog items about becoming a journalist. And he said, well, maybe that's a book. I'd love to see them. And I thought, well, yeah, I mean, I had 5 episodes per week. That's 15 chapters. I think I've written a book. And so I printed it all out and I sent it to him. And he called me up and he said, this is 32 pages long. Where's the rest of it? So I actually got the contract from the University of Minnesota to write the book the same week I got moved into the books editor job at the Strib. So I was like really, really busy. It was kind of a crazy time. When I wasn't writing the book, I felt like I should be, but then if I wasn't reading for work, then I felt like I should be doing that. And I ended up writing the book mainly over breakfast every day before I went to work. You can get a lot of writing done in a short amount of time. And so I wrote while I ate breakfast, and then I would write on the weekends, and then I would do my other work at the other time. And it took about a year, but it was fun to do. It was sort of harrowing too, because I have really clear memories of my early years at the Duluth News Tribune when I was very young. I started working there when I was 18 or 19. But then I was there for like 20 years, and so then all of those years were just sort of a big mash in my head. And I had a friend who had saved every letter I had written her. She was living in Alaska at the time, and that helped me, with a timeline and to figure out like what I was doing and what I was thinking about. And without those letters, I'm not sure I would have been able to finish it.
Two questions for Lauren. One, have you thought about doing a autobiography?
No.
Well, on another topic, have you ever thought about writing a book about bald, curmudgeon-y children's librarian?
I would come and interview you for my research.
This is probably another yes or no question. I was so impressed by your observations about banned books. There are a number of them that I don't want to misquote as I share them with others. Will you be making your speech available?
Oh, sure. I mean, sure. I'd be happy to email it to you, or yeah, I have like 47 versions of it on my hard drive. Sure.
More questions?
I'm just wondering, Laurie, now that you're retired and you have plenty of free time, are you thinking about writing another book, perhaps another memoir about your tenure as editor at the Minneapolis Star Tribune Book Review?
I don't think writing about my job at the Star Tribune would be very interesting. I don't know. It doesn't, I mean, news to me was about, this kind of wide-eyed falling into this career by accident. If I wrote another book, that would be about, how jaded I am and how hard I worked. I don't think so. I'm busier right now than I want to be, because I am doing some reviewing, and I'm also teaching in an MFA program and doing other things. So I'm hoping like next year at this time I will be doing less of that, and maybe I'll start writing stuff for myself again, but I don't know what.
We have a brief announcement from our tech support here.
So we are live streaming this right now, and it's on the University of Minnesota Library's YouTube channel, and it'll stay on that library's YouTube channel. And we'll be sending out a thank you note to everybody for attending tonight, and we'll have a link to that video as well.
Lauren, you've got another book in the works about Matisse. my favorite artist in the whole world. Tell us more about that book.
The book was kind of a surprise for me as well. My daughter called us or wrote to us, I'm sure she called us, in 2015 and said that she had just become engaged to her now husband, Marwan Ben Larbi. And so, of course, we had to go visit him. And I'd never been to Morocco before, and she was living in Tangier. And I said, we've got to have some books around the house that are about Morocco. And the only one I saw was on the shelf was from the 1990 MoMA show called Matisse in Morocco. So I pulled it off and read through the whole book. And oddly just said, oh, I think this could be a great picture book. And I started taking notes. Of course, I got a journal right away, took it to Morocco with me, did lots of sketches, brought a lot of images of Matisse's paintings with me, discovered that the very room at the Hotel Villa de France, where he stayed both times he visited Tangier, was still available, and they kept it closed off just for visitors. So I could go and look out the very windows that he looked out and painted from. Wow. And because Morocco still has the old Medina, which was the same old Medina that he walked through, there was the same cobbled stones and many of the same buildings. Nothing much had changed, that I could begin from after looking at all the sketches that he had done. And I came home and I just started playing with kind of what happened. And I don't want to tell you the whole story, but it's a pretty great story. And Tangier was a pivotal moment in his life. It had been a very dark time in his life. His father had just died. He was very depressed. The world had moved from Fauvism to looking at Cubism, and he was no longer the avant-garde king of the Fauves. And he needed light in his life. So he traveled to Tangier, Morocco, and there found, I'm not going to give everything away, but found the light, found his work changed, and even the cutouts that he did much later in life were influenced by what he had found in Tangier, Morocco. So I'm really excited about it. I'm afraid to say now it's 2025. It's taking me quite a while to paint. I'm sorry. I'll keep you on pins and needles.
I think we have time for one more question.
So this is a question both for Lauren and Laurie. Lauren, what's your favorite book, and what was the hardest one to do? And Laurie, same for your reviews. What was your favorite, and what was the hardest one to review?
You better go first.
If you talk to my husband, Matthew, he would tell you every single book is really hard for her. I would probably have to say the hardest, and the author is right here, would be Our Family Tree. And it was the challenge of imagining 4.5 billion years of history and finding that particular ancestor that she spoke about, and then figuring out how to draw the inside and the outside. It took me 2 long years of research and drawing and sketching and searching. Brilliant years that changed my life, and that's just something that I think happens when you spend that much time with a book. I don't know that I can have a favorite. It's kind of like children. Sorry. They each have their own beauty and love and a place in my heart. So
I can't tell you what the hardest one was or what my favorite one was. I can tell you it's hard every time, and that I'm very slow when I write a review. One privilege I no longer have is snatching them back and re-editing them at the last second, which I did at the Star Tribune pretty much every time I wrote anything. It was one of the advantages of being kind of a one-person show. I did have an editor, but she was very understanding, and I would change and tweak till the last minute. And now I send things off, and I'm at the mercy of editors elsewhere, and I find that really hard. But as far as reviewing, I mean, it's hard to review a book you love or that you think is just wonderful, because, you know, being effusive can sound so unsophisticated, I think. And reviewing a book that isn't very good is also difficult because it's hard to write a book. And I don't like to just, destroy people. I mean, that just seems wrong. So everyone is sort of a delicate balance of trying to understand what the writer was trying to do and then trying to assess whether or not they did it successfully. So that's kind of how I approached reviewing books.
Well, all good things must come to an end. I'd like to thank the Kerlan Friends and Alex and his committee for selecting Lauren and Laurie for this year's Kerlan Award. Thanks to Holly and Red Balloon for coming to sell books. And also thank you to Laurie for that wonderful testament to children's literature, and I agree, I'd like to see that published. And to Lauren for inviting us into your process. It's fascinating. You're both brilliant. Thank you so much. Now, if you'll be so kind as to let Lauren and Laurie go out into the atrium first, they can sit down and there'll be book signings and a reception. So please join us. Thank you for coming.